Okay, the stream should be going out here, so I'll start letting people in. Hey, folks, welcome one and all. Good to have you here again today. Lovely day in June. We'll get started here momentarily. Just make sure everybody can get themselves settled, and then we'll get rolling, rocking and rolling. I'm excited about our guest today. Very creative individual. Explore some of what he's up to. We should be out there on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and if you're out there on the socials and you're kind of checking this out, we'll introduce the program in a minute so you can understand what's going on and join us again sometime. And we'll also be putting some links into the chats so that if you want to join our actual live Zoom call right now, if you happen to be watching live on the social media, we'll try to get some links out there in the chats so you can click those and join, and we encourage you to do so. And we'll introduce where we're at here again momentarily. We like to give people a moment to settle in, but it's also good to get some context right off the bat. So here we go. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world, including manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to this program we're having right now. It's called Radio Hour, Piano Tech Radio Hour. You do that for just 16 bucks a month. You get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in our member area. You can join using the link bit.ly/joinptrh, bit.ly/joinptrh. And without further ado, I'll take a moment to introduce today's guest. Today's guest is Myron Silberstein. He's a Chicago-based teacher, vocal coach, collaborative pianist, composer, and music critic. He studied collaborative piano with Arlene Schrute at the Juilliard School and has graduate degrees in literature and philosophy from the University of Chicago's Committee on Social Thought. His performance career focuses on bringing attention to neglected masterpieces, and his compositions continue the tradition of those composers' sensibilities and emotional values. His compositions include 5 piano sonatas, 2 flute sonatas, over a dozen song cycles, and individual songs, some of which are written in collaboration with living poets, and numerous chamber and choral works. He has given first recordings to piano works by Vittorio Giannini, Peter Menin, and Norman Lloyd, and has also recorded works by Vincent Persichetti and Franz Liszt on Naxos, Centaur, Ictius, and Connoisseur Society. He teaches piano lessons, works as a coach for operatic and art song vocalists, and is a staff pianist for the C21 Women's Ensemble, a frequent accompanist for Chicago chapter NATS auditions. He is also the creator of Piano Unlocked, a web series of beginning piano lessons and advanced piano techniques. Myron, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just give a context up front. Your audio is going to be a little bit roomy, but it's for a good reason because we're going to switch over and do some piano performance today. You're a fine player and composer, and you're going to share some of that music with us. So we'll just kind of keep the settings as they are, as Zoom is a little bit finicky getting the settings right. Um, well, it's really great to have you here. I want to give the viewer, the regular viewers, a little context. I'm a little bit out of. I often zoom in from different places. Today, I wanted to say I'm actually in Mountain View, California, near Palo Alto, and we have a friend of the show here. His name is Larry Lobel. He lives about 2 hours north of where I am right now. I got to visit him yesterday and visited the Green Music Center at Sonoma State University, where he tunes pianos there, and also This is exciting, Marin. You've recorded piano, so I don't know if you're aware of this venue, but it's incredible if you ever get a chance. Um, Skywalker Sound. So we
Hmm.
visited Skywalker Sound yesterday. It's an incredible sound studio where they record orchestras for movies. They've been around for decades, and it's crazy. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's like in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of nowhere. But they've set it up like it's almost like you went to like a resort or something. They've got like restaurants and coffee bar, and I mean, it's a cool
Great.
place. A lot of cool magic goes on, and the piano there. Do you know Frederick Chu, Myron? Are you familiar with
Oh,
Frederick Chu?
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
I, I, I feel like maybe I've reviewed some of his recordings. Certainly, I've heard some of his recordings, and they're excellent.
could be. So I didn't know this. So we've had Frederick on the program a couple of times. He's a really great guy, really friendly with us. And I just learned yesterday that he helped pick out one of the pianos that they have over there at Skywalker Sound. And he's also recorded several works at Skywalker Sound. So keep an eye out for that venue for recordings, Myers. It's an interesting place. They have the opportunity to do like top level sound production. Um, but yeah, we'll talk about that later. Myron, let's just get a little bit of foundation. What's your origin story in terms of a musician? Were you playing at an early age? Were you a late bloomer? Did you have a musical family? How did this all come about that you have a musical career?
Sure. I do come from a musical family. My grandmother was really an excellent pianist and someone who did not play professionally but played beautifully all of her life. And my parents had a baby grand piano that was originally my mother's grandmother's. So when my grandmother would come over to visit, she would go to the piano and she would play a mix of Chopin and Rachmaninoff and songs out of the Sesame Street songbook, which of course appealed to me tremendously. And I do remember there being some point or other where I felt like I wanted to imitate her and couldn't. Um, I also know that my father had various songbooks that had lead sheets, the melody line and the chords, and these were songs that we'd listen to on the record player, and I was just so frustrated that there were dots on the page and I knew what the tune was and I couldn't get the piano to produce that tune. So there was an urge from very early on. Um, and the family legend is that my father, who is musically knowledgeable as well, um, wrote out all of the scales and all of the key signatures on staff paper for me, and that this suddenly made everything comprehensible to me. And this seems to be uh, strange because that's not really the way it should work. I mean, certainly that's not the first thing I do when I'm teaching a brand new student. But maybe it did work, and I can say that the attunement to patterns within music has always been a strength of mine. And that means analysis of music that I'm studying and creation of my own music, being aware how things are put together, how composers are using their material and developing their material is something that has always been very natural to me. Um, when I was about 6 or 7, I had my first actual piano lessons with a very nice local teacher who, after a couple of years, sent me on to her own teacher, who I stayed with through the bulk of elementary school and junior high school and into high school. And at the point that I was 14 or so, she had a connection to someone in New York City who was not a piano teacher but a piano pedagogue, and that was my next teacher. So I had the foundations. I was a good sight reader. I didn't know a thing about how to practice effectively. I was 14 and saying I wanted to be a pianist, and had you know amateur, non-practiced technique, but some natural facility and interest, and then I needed to learn how to really develop as a musician and as a pianist.
Cool. Well, yeah. So it kind of like happened. You kind of fell into it from there, I suppose.
Yeah.
You jumped in a little bit deeper than you thought, but you learned how to swim.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, I made a lot of progress in those first couple of years after going to the pedagogue, who his introduction of himself to me was cranky. You know, he said something along the lines of, "I hear that you want to be a pianist and that you don't practice very much. I'm giving you a summer. By the end of the summer, you'll be practicing 4 hours a day, and you'll be doing it in the way that I teach you, or you can go back to your teacher in the suburbs." And I didn't actually know for sure that that was what I wanted to do, but I also didn't want to burn bridges. So, you know, what's the worst that can happen for trying it for 3 months? And in fact, what happened for trying it 3 months is I became a whole lot better.
Tell me the difference, because I haven't, I mean, I'm familiar with the word pedagogue and I'm familiar with pedagogy and teacher, but I don't know that I'm familiar with okay, a distinction or difference. So tell me just, you had mentioned this, this person was a teacher, this person was a pedagogue. What do you see as the difference, or what did you learn as the difference between those two roles?
And I'll say that it's a difference in some ways that I'm making up, because I don't think that you'll find it in any kind of textbook. But um, there are teachers who are excellent, who instill a love of music in students, and give them the information that is needed to be able to get by on the piano and enjoy playing the piano. Uh, I see a pedagogue as someone whose primary interest is in teaching potential pianists how to become uh, pianists, professional pianists or advanced pianists.
Yeah, that makes sense. Contextually, that makes sense. But yeah, it's interesting though because I feel like pedagogy to me also evokes the study of learning and teaching, right? Like someone who takes the process of, you know, educating someone a little bit more from a meta perspective, right? And kind of takes the actual process of what how does teaching work more seriously. But
And I think that that's right, and I think that that can apply not just to people who teach teachers how to teach, but also in the approach to teaching students. And another distinction that I would make is um, you can teach someone how to play the piano by giving them instruction to do certain things with their fingers, or to study certain exercises, or to give them certain pieces. And you can do all of that without explaining the more abstract concepts behind it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And in fact, I suspect that many students would find it boring
mhm.
to, sort of have thrown on them in piano lessons all of the details of why you should sit a certain distance from the bend, from the keyboard, or why do this exercise instead of another exercise, or why do you need to think this way when you practice instead of you know practicing however you're inspired to practice at any time. But I think that even if you're not training someone to become a professional pianist, that there is an approach to teaching that gives the student all of that information. And I think, speaking as a teacher myself, I think it creates a lot of buy-in. One of the things that's crucial to me is that my students uh, understand the purpose of anything that I'm suggesting to them. It should never be
Hmm.
a matter of my authority, right?
Just
That
because I said so.
yeah, just because I said so. Um, you need to do this exercise, and you need to do it at this tempo and at this volume. It always
Hmm.
has to be, well, if you do it at this tempo and this volume, that gives you the opportunity to think about these things, and that will give you a greater connection to how your fingers work in this way. And then, regardless of whether a student actually loves going through the activity of the practice, they can always connect it to a purpose. And when they do make progress from it, they can also always connect the dots between how they're practicing is showing up in their progress. And then you have really sort of a lovely leverage point because you start off with students who would like to play better, but of course have not been taught about how practicing works. And the initial response to instruction and how to practice is that it probably sounds kind of boring. And even students who like me and like the ideas when I verbalize it will take a little while to really give it their all. And the other challenge with this is that practicing doesn't show up as progress in any sort of immediate way. By which I don't just mean that, well, practice for 15 minutes and after 15 minutes play and you'll see all the good that it does for you, which obviously,
Right.
you certainly won't. But practice this way for 2 weeks and you might only see the slightest glimmer of it being of any value.
Yeah.
And if a student can kind of suspend disbelief for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then there's that first sign that the things that they were doing are directly connected to the greater facility that they're having, then there's the leverage point where that makes them want to do, if they were doing 40% of the things I suggested, they'll want to do 50% now.
Right. They can see some turnaround. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it too, but I have some background in neuroscience, and
Oh,
I that part of the reason I got into the neuroscience domain was I was in music and I started to become fascinated with how understanding how the brain worked helped me practice better, learn better, progress as a musician. And now I find myself often when I'm teaching about something, I'm bringing in those analogies about what's going on. I do a little bit of coaching sometimes, every week, everything from sort of your career direction to kind of changing some aspect of your life as well. And just being able to say, okay, this is actually what's going on here. You're forging new connections in this
mhm.
area of your brain, and this is why it takes a certain amount of time to gain traction. This is why, they say perfect practice makes perfect,
Mhm.
but imperfect practice does not make perfect.
No,
And
that's
there's,
exactly right.
yeah,
And I don't have a background in neuroscience, but one of the things that I'm often talking to my students about is that the biggest frustrations that students have, and it's really very sad, is that they try to play a piece and they can't sight read it, which of course they can't sight read it. And the conclusion that they draw from that is that they're not very talented, and then they get discouraged.
mm,
But I spend a lot of time speaking with my students about the fact that before the hands can move at the speed of the piece, the mind has to be familiarized not just with what the notes are, but with what the movements are that are going to be needed to play the notes. And that the very slow, meticulous practice that again sounds so boring is the laboratory where we're not just studying notes, but we're teaching our hands and our arms to move very specific distances. The distance from C to the C, the octave up, is an absolutely specific distance, and it's a different distance than C to the C sharp, an octave up. And to get the hand comfortable with the idea that this is exactly how far it needs to move takes some exercise and takes some very slow preparation. That when you're trying to keep up with the music that's going actually faster than you can even read it, there's just no space to do that kind of muscular training.
mm. I want to have you play very soon so that we
Sure.
get some context there and just kind of get that side of things. We've been doing a lot of intellectualizing and
Hmm.
verbalization, but just one more comment on what you're saying. I forget where I've heard it like recently in many different directions. I don't know if you've heard this particular phrase, but it's a variation on some of the stuff we're talking about. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast,
Yeah, yeah, I
right?
think
So if you
that's
can do it slowly, but slow enough that it helps you do it smoothly, the smoothness of it that you can generate then helps you speed things up. And that makes a lot of sense from the way the brain works, and the
Mhm.
muscles and all that stuff.
Right. And you want the fast work to essentially be a reminder of something that you already know, rather than a place where you're making split-second decisions that that you don't have time to really feel secure about the decisions that you're making.
One more thing. When I first started, in my neuroscience, I studied birdsong as
Mm.
part of that training. And so we had birds in a lab and we would do experiments. One of my first experimental ideas, because the birds learn these little birds, the zebra finches, they would learn their song from the adult birds. And one of my first experimental ideas was, what if it was like the human learning process, where if you could slow the song down, maybe the bird would learn it better, right? You could give it a slower version of it. Um, I have to say we did not come up with any conclusive results. I think the birds they're just they're so ingrained biologically to just have to learn from the fast version, right? Because they never
Mm.
get the opportunity. That I don't think that really helped at all. Although you could go back and redo the experiment. I thought that was interesting. Um, all right. Let's have just some music. I think it's a good transition. What would you like to share with us first? We're gonna do a couple in musical interludes.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to play the first of a series of four impromptus that I wrote a couple of years ago. So I'll
Wonderful.
swivel around for, whoop, maybe not swivel quite that much.
Yeah, that's a great angle though.
All
Yep.
right.
Thank you.
Oh, well,
Wonderful.
thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I love the I hadn't we had did met before and I had to hear another one of your pieces, so I'm starting to develop, more of a taste for what you pull together. And
Mhm.
I really just love the melodic lines and the chords, and we had talked before about how uh, it it resonates with my love for jazz music,
Mhm.
and some of the things that are going on in jazz music, different eras and different styles. I mean, particularly I was hearing all those like fourths and fifths, and I
Mhm.
was thinking of kind of like um, McCoy Tyner, coming in and playing these type of voicings and melodies, and but you and I had talked about this previously, and so share with us, this relationship between classical music and potentially, jazz music, and the way that these type of voicings and chords and melodies have entered
Mhm.
uh, your vocabulary.
Sure. Um, Maybe the first thing to say is that I know very, very little about jazz. Um, and what I hear passively, I love and admire, but I don't have a jazz record collection. I can't articulate the different styles or the big names. Um, so, which is a preface to saying that what I know of these chords and these rhythms and these voicings have come from the classical side, and what is important to me is the permeation and overlap um, that at times was a direct emulation. So you think of Debussy, doing something like Gollywog's Cakewalk, and that is in fact a cakewalk. And so these are classical composers that heard some jazz music or some popular music, and they liked it, and they decided they wanted to they wanted to see if they could put it into their voice. And those are those are great pieces. I gotta say, one of what I honestly think is one of the great 20th century works is Milhaud's Le Création du Monde. And what's fascinating about it is Milhaud was one of the most authentically aware composers in terms of his relationship to jazz. Um, and toward the end of Le Création, there are these riffs that he notates in the score, and they're impossible to read. He's got 30-second notes tied to dotted 16th notes on the next beat. I mean, all of the things that actually someone who knows jazz would say, hey, okay, that's back phrasing. That's the band is having some fun, and the saxophone is doing some sort of cadenzas here, but
Hmm.
Neo writes it in to a T. And if you're a classically trained musician, I would imagine those rhythms would be very, very difficult to intellectualize. They're something you have to hear. So that's one level of influence. But then the other level is that as composers began working with things like 11th chords and 13th chords, as they began extending tonality, those composers who didn't want to fully break tonality and go into serialism or spectralism or so on, wound up writing things that, with these extended chords and their allegiance to tonality, are hard to distinguish from jazz.
Hmm.
And one of the great ones, aside from people like Poulenc, whose harmonies sound so much, you ought to be in a nightclub with a few packs of cigarettes, smoking all 60 of them at once. But Paul Creston, whose works I recorded for my last CD, was also not a jazz performer, not a jazz composer, but was so interested in rhythm, which he had felt was generally neglected in the sphere of composition, that he developed a whole theory of how rhythms can overlap between the hands. One hand can be in one meter, another hand can be in the other meter. Of how accents work to create the illusion of different meters and so on. And he also was enamored of Debussy and Ravel and did all of the dominant ninth chords and so on. So he's got these kind of extended tonality harmonies plus extended rhythmic ideas, and a lot of it winds up sounding like, wow, maybe he was a jazz composer, and actually some of his students became jazz composers.
Mm. Fascinating. I'm loving this. Um, are you familiar with Jacob Collier at all? Is that somebody that
I'm
you
not,
know
no.
of, or oh, okay. You might be intrigued. He's a younger guy that is gaining quite a bit of popularity, and he was discovered by Quincy Jones, famous record producer who produced, Michael Jackson and all
Right.
these great artists. Um, but he was just making some YouTube videos and creating his own music. He does some vocal things too. I know you do some vocal music as well. But his sort of theory chops are just insane. He's just got always using these like crazy theoretical concepts in his music, um, and there's some classical influence, jazz. It all just sort of comes together in one thing. So it's interesting to hear him talk about. music and composition and things like that. And often it can resonate with, both people coming from the classical domain and the popular or jazz direction.
Mhm.
Um, well, that's wonderful. I'm learning a lot, and would love to feel like it'd just be great to kind of just sit down with you and listen to some records sometime,
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. Anytime.
We learn a ton. Um, all right. I mean, there's a lot that we could talk about. I guess the concept of vocals and vocalists just came into the conversation. So I wouldn't mind just touching upon that so we have a little bit of context. So tell us a little bit about your experience with and interest in working with vocalists or doing things in the vocal domain.
Hmm. Um, I had been the accompanist for my high school choir, and also in my school there was such a tremendously strong music program. And in New York, one of the things that students have the opportunity to do is to audition for what's called NYSSMA, the New York State Schools Music Association. So it's the East Coast version of what we have here in Chicago as solo and ensemble. So students prepare a piece, they play the piece for an adjudicator, they get feedback. If they get outstanding scores, they can be nominated to participate in all county or all state ensembles. So my school did not have an external accompanist. They didn't hire outside people, so I was the guy. And so I played for the choir. I played for a number of singers who auditioned for NYSSMA. Um, and it was just something that I did early on. I had mentioned that I was studying with what I had called a piano pedagogue, and the plan was to have a you know com- completely textbook traditional piano career. I was going to go to a conservatory. I was going to audition for young artists competitions. Uh, I was going to win them. I was going to achieve international renown playing standard repertoire, etc. Um, and the reality is that I had just started with a serious teacher a little bit too late. I was a motivated student with passion for the piano, but I didn't have the technique. And I auditioned for conservatories when I was 17, and I was waitlisted or didn't get in. And I was making a lot of progress with my teacher. So I decided to take what was going to be 1 year off to improve my technique and maybe audition again. And it was then that I did not matriculate at Juilliard, but took classes in the extension division. And one of the classes that I took was Arlene Schrutz's collaborative piano class. Um, and Arlene was and is, I think, one of the finest teachers of collaborative piano around. Um, and we had a class recital at the end. Advanced stuff. A good deal of Schubert art songs. I even played a couple of movements of the Mahler Kindertotenlieder. Um, uh, Copeland, wide variety of styles. And aside from enjoying the collaboration, um, it's also it's also a source of income. Being able as a pianist to provide support for singers and instrumentalists, especially if you're also able to give them coaching, is honestly a secure way to have an income.
Hmm.
Um, so I got involved with that, and um, it's been central to my professional work really for the duration. Um,
That's
when
interesting.
I
Our last guest, Miguel de la Serna, Serna, I think it's Serna or Sena, I forget, but he's also a Chicago pianist, but on on the jazz side.
Mhm.
And he uh, a lot of his career, he said he developed into kind of the accompanist for vocalists. There's accompanists in many domains as well beyond vocalists, but it's a specialized skill too to be able to, you know, take that role, be so supportive, know how to do it with grace and style, um, and not a lot of people necessarily maybe they're gravitating towards the spotlight too. So,
Hmm.
it's not as attractive to kind of be in that role, but it's so essential. And like you said, makes the money.
Right. Well, and I think that as any financial planner will tell you, it's wise to diversify. Um, so I never I never scheduled the level of teaching where I wasn't able to practice. So working on solo repertoire has never fallen by the wayside. But to set my sights solely on being a solo pianist um, as my only source of income, and with the idea of it being a self-sustaining career, in a world that is glutted by solo pianists playing standard repertoire, with an ever diminishing audience pool, it was just not a viable proposition. And so, between teaching and vocal coaching and playing in churches, and playing various sorts of gigs, that's a way that you can have a sustaining life as a pianist. The trick is you have to actually like all of it, and I will say that if you're gritting your teeth at every minute and hating your clients and so on, then it's not good for you. It's not good for the clients. It's ultimately not going to be good for business.
Yeah, yeah. You gotta get it. You gotta have kind of have a certain joy from it. I want to hear some more music, and I know we
Sure.
wanted to fit in like three things, so I feel like
Yeah.
let's just switch topics again into the language of music for a moment. What else would you like to share with us today?
Um, I'd like to play the second movement, the slow movement from my fourth piano sonata.
Wonderful. Let's have it.
It's
That one will really take you on a journey.
Oh, well, thank you.
I would describe that as I was trying to think of what it was. The first words that came to mind was stellar, thinking
Oh,
like
well, thank you.
like a starry sky, and then cosmic. You know, it
Mm.
had this kind of cosmic journey in my mind when I'm listening to it. Um, Tell me what's going on there between the left and the right hand, because I found that interesting to kind of they feel independent but coordinated, and
Hmm.
I wasn't listening closely enough to see if there was some sort of different time signatures or, because they weren't exactly synchronized. Was there anything special, or was that just sort of an illusion that I picked up?
This one is not intentionally rhythmic focused. It's in some
Hmm.
ways more song-like
Hmm.
and more contrapuntal. But what it does do is it doesn't stick to a meter. So there are changing meters, and there are also phrases that don't begin on the downbeat. So the very beginning of it, even though it's simply melody over chords, it starts on beat two. But then the next measure is beat is a three beat measure starting on beat one, and
Mm.
what ties it together is melodic fragments. Um, the entire sonata, all three movements of it, very strongly involves a fourth going up plus a second going down.
Mm.
And you can keep on doing that, which is the first four notes of the melody. But you can also do things like in the first movement, or things like. So you've got them going up, you've got them going down. The fourth turned upside down becomes a fifth. So instead of
Hmm.
fourth up, second down, you can have fifth down, second up.
Hmm.
So the fact that it is uh, technically you could say interval based, but I want to say it's melodic based, it's theme based. That gives me a lot of freedom rhythmically and a lot of freedom contrapuntally to do whatever I want to do.
Great. Thank you for diving into that a little bit.
But
Well,
that's analysis. I mean, that's how is the piece put
hmm.
together, and what I think is so important is even though there are um, abstract threads that unify the piece, uh, the motivation for it is purely emotional. I wanted this to be poignant. I wanted it to be fragile. I wanted it to have a kind of late Brahmsian type of resolution. These repeated octaves. And those are the kinds of things
Hmm.
that Brahms does, in the third violin sonata or the four serious songs. And what I think is really exciting about being a composer is the input that we have from our experience of listening to other composers gives us a musical vocabulary, but it also gives us an emotional vocabulary. And so to recognize that Brahms has pedal tone octaves that kind of toll away in this very sort of profound reflective way, then the obligation becomes, if that's a feeling that I'm having and I connect it to that, then the rest of the material has to it always has to represent me. You can't cut and paste out of Brahms.
Hmm. Well, they say great, what is it? Good artists copy, great artists steal. I guess you could do it if you want to. Um, no, but yeah, you've done a great job. Yeah, the way that I would explain it, I was going to ask you, but I think you sort of answered the question I had. going to ask, how much of that is intellectual, how much of it is intuitive. And it sounds like with this particular piece, it's kind of like a nice mix of
Mhm.
like an intellectual side and an intuitive side, kind of just pulling it together and letting it evolve. Yeah.
Yeah, the way that I write is something occurs to me, which sounds passive, and in some ways it is. You know, there'll be times that I'll improvise around on the piano and uh, write down the things that I like as sort of building blocks for something that may happen. But more often, something will occur to me, and I'll write again at the piano. Trying things out. I'll write you know 30 seconds of music, um, and sheerly on instinct and on experimentation and feeling. And then what will happen is there reaches a certain point in the piece where I've written enough music that I start to say to myself, "Wow, there's a lot of ideas here. How about we take a step back and look at what exactly is going on here? What did I just do?"
Hmm.
And then figuring out what I've done
Hmm.
allows me to articulate some threads that can get me the rest of the way through the piece.
Hmm. It's like unpack it,
Hmm.
see what you got, and then pack it back up and
Hmm.
continue the journey. Yeah, that's cool. Um, oh, what? Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, with especially with I think it was that last one. Yeah, it was very visual for me as I closed my eyes. It had sort of like this visual thing to it. Have you done any? It doesn't seem like you've done a lot. Maybe you've done a little music with imagery, like having people maybe create like a moving image along with your music. If not, I would encourage it. But yeah, have you had experience with that?
I haven't done that, but what I did do, and this is rare for me because you notice that the first piece I played was one of a series of impromptus, and this which I just played is a slow movement from a sonata, and in fact it's from my fourth sonata. So there have been a lot of sonatas, but I did write a series of pieces called Winter Landscapes, and those are miniatures. And I actually wrote them a couple of springs ago. It was April through late May that I wrote these pieces. Um, but I had very clear ideas of visuals in my mind.
Hmm.
Um, I'll also say my wife is a very good painter,
Hmm.
and she has painted uh, canvases that are inspired by or representative of music that I've written,
Oh,
and
perfect. Yeah, that would be
we've
great.
talked about the idea of her uh, initiating a canvas and me trying to write music to represent the canvas. So that's
Yeah.
and I'm certainly
Well, what
someone
if you
who's
could, yeah.
around visual art a lot.
Yeah. What if you could go to like a gallery, right? You go to a
Mhm.
gallery, you know, whatever you call it. It's like a gallery event, exhibition, whatever. And then there's a set of headphones with each painting, and you could,
That would be very
oh,
cool.
that'd be cool.
That would be very cool.
Um, Also, I feel like dance. Interestingly enough, like with that last one, you said there's lots of mixed meter, so I don't know exactly how that would work, but I could imagine some sort of dance alongside of it. Um, well, there's a lot to unpack, so I doubt that we'll get to show every little nook and cranny of the things that you're up to. But just as a hint of that, I want to talk about Sanskrit. There's
Mhm.
like coming out of left field here.
Mhm.
Tell us about your involvement with Sanskrit and Indian culture and how that came about and how it plays a role in your creative life.
Sure. Um, I began taking Sanskrit in college, and the reason for this is because there were certain courses that my college only offered every 2 years, uh, anticipated low enrollment. And as I'm sure you could imagine, first semester Sanskrit does not get a wide class size. It's not a big draw, particularly when it's at 9 in the morning. Um,
Hmm.
but though I didn't have any background in Indian culture at all, beyond having there's a really good Indian restaurant row in Pittsburgh where I went to school, and I'd eat at those restaurants, and there would be paintings with Sanskrit verses on them. I thought the alphabet was pretty. I mean, this is exactly the kind of undergraduate rationale for doing something. Why not? I mean, I'm in college. It's available to me. When else is it going to be available to me? And if I don't do it now, I've got to wait 2 years. And again, what's the harm in taking one semester? It's 12 weeks. And it was fascinating. The grammar is so intricate and so expressive. And I did well in the class, and I just kept on taking more semesters of it. And by the end of the third semester, though the textbooks always have translation exercises, they're not literary translation.
Hmm.
The king has an enemy. That's something you might translate.
Hmm.
But by the end of third semester, we were reading literature, and it's so imagistic and so fantastic. And the other part of this, which had not really been operative in my mind at the time, is one of my favorite authors was John Barth. And in John Barth's novels, he talks about how he had been a library intern at Johns Hopkins and had to reshelve everything in the classics department, and would sort of sneak time away from reshelving to actually read the stuff that he was supposed to be reshelving, and that he had come across the 1930s translation called The Ocean of Story, which is a translation of the epic, the Katasurit Saga, which is very, very underlooked. The Mahabharata, the Ramayana are the paramount Sanskrit literary texts, and the Katasurit Saga is who's ever heard of that? But it's a compendium of stories that descended through the Arabian Nights into Boccaccio and Chaucer and Shakespeare, and they're just so generative of so much
Wow.
that once I began taking Sanskrit, it occurred to me, wait, wasn't there some Sanskrit thing in this book that I liked, and maybe someday I'll read that. So I wound up taking more until I could read that, which I did in graduate school. But in terms of my musical career, the one place it has had a direct influence is about 4 years ago. I decided I wanted to do a multi-tradition collection of prayers for peace. This was during the time that the pandemic had begun, and there was considerable despair all over the world, and considerable unrest as well. The first thing that I set was the Oseh Shalom, which is the Jewish prayer for peace, which is very familiar to me. It then occurred to me, the Shantipata is very different in perspective. Rather than he who makes peace in high places, in the heavens, bring peace also to us. The Shantipata, oh, let the peace that's in the heavens and the peace that's in the firmament, and it goes down a taxonomy to everything. The peace that's in the trees, let the peace that is in plants and animals and in medicines, and even let the peace that is in peace itself also be the peace that is in me. So once I wrote those two, I started thinking of what other traditions have peace prayers, traditions that I'm familiar with languages that I'm familiar with, and what the perspectives would be. So I set the apocryphal prayer of Saint Francis, written by a French monk around World War I. Lord, let me be an instrument of your peace. And then I also, in examining the Quran, there were some lovely, lovely surahs that I considered setting, but then I thought, why not the everyday greeting, Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you,
Hmm.
which continues, and the mercy of God. So I set those, and those have been some of my most successful pieces in terms of interest.
Hmm.
Chelsea Hollow, the San Francisco-based soprano, and her pianist Taylor Chan recorded two of them, the Sanskrit and the Arabic prayers, and released those on Arcade Records. And Elizabeth Schumann, who was recently the Collaborative Arts Institute of Chicago's vocal chamber fellow, asked me to arrange Assalamu Alaikum and Oseh Shalom for string quartet and soprano, and she did those at her culmination recital. And they've actually just been published by North Star Music, which they're coming out with an edition that'll be for three voice types, high, medium, and low. So I have to finish editing up the low voice edition. The high and medium edition is up and running already.
Beautiful. What a wonderful project. I want us because we made space for it, at least in our plan. I want to have a bit more music, and then we'll wrap it up because that's what we do. We try to keep it to an hour. So
Sure.
yeah, play us another piece. Love to hear it.
Sure. Since we spoke about the winter landscapes,
Hmm.
why don't I do one of them?
If you've
And
got it, sure.
I'll play it and not tell you the title, and I won't play a guessing game, but I'll play it and then we can talk about the title.
All right. Okay, wonderful. So a little guessing game as to what the title or the
If
inspiration.
if you'd like, if
I mean,
something
it's
immediately occurs to you.
it's hard because you said winter landscape, so then I'm just thinking of winter landscape. So the first thing that comes to mind is like snowy forest or something like that.
Well,
But
I mean, the title for it is Sunlight on Snow.
okay, beautiful. Yeah, I
But
like
I
that.
also have in that series, I have Bare Trees and Afternoon Shadows, which is a kind of menacing piece, and the finale to it is the Frozen Lake. So it's a Chicago-based series. Uh,
So we don't get too depressed and
right.
in Chicago we got to make some music in the wintertime.
But I mean, and you mentioned in the impromptu the presence of fourths and fifths, and there's something that I find so
Yeah,
crystalline about these
it
kind of
is.
stacked
Yep.
fourths. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also that interesting overlap, which again we can't dive too deep into, but just to give people something to think about. And we actually talked about it with some other composers and players previously. The synesthesia, like
Hmm.
this of music and visuals, right? What's really interesting about it from a neuroscientific perspective is the universality of some of these experiences. Why is it that, I'll hear these fourths and fifths and harmonies and melodies and you'll play them and you'll hear them and you'll say something like crystalline or, shimmery, and we both go, yeah, yeah, that's
Hmm.
the sound of this visual thing. And again, I don't have the specific research or things like that, but from the patterns that I've seen in neuroscience, it's literally that some of the pathways where these two things overlap in the brain, they cross paths right there at this place, and so that we can create these associations. And the reason that some people are more synesthetic than others, where they actually may see a visual thing happen. Sometimes the explanation has been, and it's been a while since I looked deep into the research. There may be developments here. Um, is it what they call inhibition?
Hmm.
So just like when you're sleeping, your brain inhibits all the in sensory input so that you can sleep. So you don't hear things that you normally would, so you can sleep. So you can focus on the world. Let me just listen to this versus let me see this, or let me see this over here, which is important visually, versus this is a totally different thing auditorially. There's inhibition going on in your brain so that because you can't even imagine, right? If all of the sensory input in your surroundings, auditory, visual, sensory, from touch, if that was all just nonstop, you wouldn't even be able to handle it. So there's this
Hmm.
inhibition going on. It's just so that we don't get overwhelmed with all the signals coming in. But I love that. I love that, crystalline, shimmery type of thing. It's relatively universal. Um, okay, well let's start to wrap things up so we don't go too much over time here. Where can people go to find out more? There's a lot more to find out. As I said, we kind of had other topics we could talk about, but where would you suggest people go to explore more?
My website, myronsilverstein.com, is the most direct and most comprehensive, and that has pages about my uh, solo performance work, my vocal coaching, and my composition, as well as a contact form to get directly in touch with me.
Okay, wonderful. That works. Yeah, websites work. Well, other than that, I'll just do an outro here and we'll wrap up and we'll look out for more great stuff. This will come out as a podcast, within the next month or two as well, so people can listen in. But I'll wrap us out and say we've reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Thanks again to Myron Silverstein as well as our local audience here for joining us. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting edge instruction for piano industry masters without leaving your home. If you joined us today just by signing for this session, individually make your life more convenient. Subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour, just $16 a month. Get the recording of today's session in our member area, automatic registration for each week's news session. You can sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. And so we don't forget, you make sure you check us out on our social media channels, Piano Tech Masterclass or various variations of that. We've got LinkedIn, we've got Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got Facebook. We're doing all sorts of activities on all of these places. We got the podcast at pianotechradio.com. Wonderful guests there. We've got a blog where we do more deeper educational stuff for piano technicians at pianotechniciansmasterclass.substack.com. We have a convention coming up on the 20th of this month, not that far off. We have three great lecturers in piano technology, as well as a surprise guest who's Grammy nominated and going to teach us about engaging with unique musical styles. So it's like a bonus thing that we'll reveal more about as we continue. So make sure and join the convention bit.ly/PTMC24. Let's get you registered for that. And that's probably enough plugs. Let's sign it off and say thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.